So hello, I'm Steve Lasker. I'm a program manager at Microsoft. I work on lots of different stuff, actually. Right now, I'm a program manager for SQL Server Compact. In Visual Studio 2005, I did a lot of the data design time tools, like the data sources window, object binding, a lot of the stuff in WinForms. And I did a lot of our local database experiences for what was SQL Mobile then, SQL Server Express, and was trying very hard to get SQL Server Mobile available on desktops as well. It took us a couple of months after we shipped 2005, but we got there. So I'm going to talk today around how we can really leverage SQL Server Compact in your apps. And a lot of people have challenges that we have an awesome product with SQL Server, but it is a server. So it's hard to sometimes deploy with your app. And that's what we're going to talk about, how here with SQL Server Compact, we can really kind of change the game on how we look at this and actually put the database in the app rather than trying to put the app in the database. A lot of times when people are trying to just cache data, whether it be online or offline, and how do we do that effectively? And how do we leverage database assets without thinking in large terms or having to go all the way to XML? The link to XML, it's great, but it's not a database. It just gives us a unified programming model over that. How do we deal with transactions and multiple concurrent access to the same data? So these are the kind of things that we want to be able to do with Compact and just enable it within your app. Now, how many of you guys are developers? Anybody, any DBAs in here? No. Okay. Well, he's kind of holding his hand up. Maybe, sort of, when I have to be. So developers like tools. Right? It seems DBAs are fine typing all the time with T-SQL, and we're trying to get them IntelliSense, but it doesn't seem to be a priority for them. So we have a lot of tools inside of Visual Studio and Management Studio that'll show how you can use with SQL Server Compact as well. And of course, as developers, we do code. So we do have some coding scenarios, and I'll spend a bit showing how we have the unique and common features to SQL Server Compact. Now, as you start deploying databases, we need to start thinking around security aspects. So how can we leverage that, but actually be consistent with the other doc formats that we have in the engine? And then I'll talk a little bit about how we can actually use SQL CE as a custom doc format. Okay? So I'll do a bunch of demos. In fact, I'll start one here with kind of how we think of how SQL Server Compact changes the game. So I'm going to create a new project here, and I'm going to choose Windows Forms. And the same functionality from a programming model and SQL Server Compact is completely consistent, whether it be Windows Forms or WPF. Okay? It's just we haven't gotten the designer support as robust as Windows Forms yet in WPF. So I'm just going to show this in Windows Forms so I can show you the whole end-to-end demo here. And then I'm also happily using VB. I actually don't care. And you'll see that everything that we're coding against doesn't matter either. And if you've seen my other talks, you'll see how I code in C#. So we have, as we were joking earlier, we've kind of been in this bad habit of changing the names. So we decided to actually name the add item templates to be more scenario driven because the scenarios don't change. So what was MSDE, which became Express, and it's still Express. We didn't change it again. We call it a service-based database. A local database is a SQL Server Compact database. So we'll just say my database.sdf. And SDF is the default extension. We'll talk a little bit later how we can actually change the extension to be whatever you want in your app. Now just double click it, and for those of you that were at my Express talk, you'll notice that things are running a little bit faster, in fact a lot faster. It's the same laptop. With SQL CE, it's an in-proc database. It just loads as a DLL, just like any other your code. So there's no services to start, no database, master databases to copy, no authentication, things that have to run across process in the machine. Just load a DLL, call some methods on it. So it runs really fast in your, within your app domain here. So we'll create a table, and we'll just take some defaults here. Now I've got my table, and I could simply just add some data. Show table data. So I have database tools right here. And again, even this comes up faster. And probably know I got this Flintstones fetish thing going on here. We'll go bam, bam. We'll spell Bam Bam, right? And we'll get Wilma in here because she's pissed if we don't show her. All right, so we got some data. We've got it in the form. And now I want to actually get that data in my app. So I'm showing the data sources window here. One, because I worked on this, so I personally like it. It's got a lot of experience in it, a lot of integration into the whole experience. But the same model works with link to SQL, link to entities, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm simply going to drag and drop this on my form. So probably nothing new here from what you've seen. Pretty much everything I've shown you works exactly the same way with SQL Server. So that's all fine, right? Hit F5, life's good, because it's my development machine. I've got everything just running here. Well, what happens when I want to deploy this out to my users? So how many of your users have admin rights on their machine? Yeah, a couple. And what are we at Microsoft telling you to do? Don't use admin rights. In fact, even in Vista, when you have admin rights, you still don't have admin rights. So we're kind of sending this mixed message here. So by default, when you add a SQL C data file or a SQL Express data file, we're going to help you out and set up some prerequisites, and we're going to add SQL Server Compact as a prerequisite to your app. Now, that's one way to deploy it. I actually don't want to deploy SQL CE as an MSI, because MSIs, while they don't necessarily require admin rights, in order to register something in the global assembly cache, global, machine, admin, you need admin rights. I don't need admin rights. I'm going to click once deployed it, just like kind of a web app, and I just want to run the DLLs with my app. So what I can do here is take the SQL CE engine, take the DLLs, pop them right in my app, just like you would do anything else. Tell it to copy to the output directory, if newer. So when I get another build of it, I can pop it in here. It'll automatically put it in my bin directory. Now I've got the engine. For the managed provider, so this is the native part of the SQL CE engine. We've got a managed reference that was automatically added by the designer here. I'll just make that true because I can't assume it's going to be GAC'd on my end user's machine. And now I can deploy this. Now, just to show that, I'm going to add a button here. And we'll do a process.start. And we'll do the application.startup path to show what we've actually done here. And here's your C# code. Everybody happy? So start, and we'll also show up the application.local user app data path, which is where my database is stored. In fact, we'll pop that there. So now we'll click once publish this, and we'll just pop it to my local default website. And what am I at? 23. Fine. And you can publish this to a CD. You can publish it to a file share. There's all kinds of great stuff with click once here. So I'll launch this. I'll install it because I've told that I want it to be sticky. I want my startup menu, and it's great. I happen to have SQL C installed on my machine. But if I didn't, no problem, because there it is right there, right in my application directory. And I just deployed it with my app. So that's how we're kind of talking about how with SQL CE being an in-proc DLL-based engine, you can think about using SQL Server in many more different ways than you might have been able to do before. Cool? Oh, I'll talk about it in a slide, but basically it's in the program files directory of where we install SQL Server Compact. So the DLL's there. And I've highlighted just a couple of them here. I'll talk a bit about how I don't need all of them necessarily. So it's just kind of a quick end-to-end to kind of keep you in the room for the rest of the session so you don't go running off to somewhere else. Now we'll drill into that. Well, SQL CE is, like I said, it's about a meg. If you use merge replication or RDA, or if you're doing native development and you need OLADB, there's some additional DLLs that you can add into your app as well. They're layered, they're factored. You don't have to bring the whole thing. So that's one way to break it down. We think of it as a nice subset of SQL Server. There's a reason this is a megabyte and SQL Server's a lot more. Okay? We didn't just run a really big compaction thing on this thing. We took the core functionality when you're putting a database in the app, and said, here's the core principles that we need. And we're churning on this. I'll talk a little bit about what we've added in 3.5. Now, we don't have sprox, views, triggers, or xquery. There's some of these that they're interesting scenarios that don't necessarily apply in different reasons. This is the favorite one, is sprox. Well, if I have sprox, are you going to expect your sprox from SQL Server to run all the way in SQL CE, copy and paste? Well, there's a lot of stuff inside T-SQL that, again, we're not going to be a megabyte if we add all that stuff. How many of you code in VB or C#? Do you guys prefer that, or would you rather code in T-SQL? So once the database is in the app, why, you want to, all right, so you write your queries and so forth, and we have link as well. But why not write it in managed code? So the consistency becomes an interesting thing, and I'll talk a bit about where you can get consistency. So sprox, we look at just using managed methods. Views, at best, you can get one table to be updated. What happens when I want to update all three of them? With the Entity Platform, we can actually update all 3, 5, 7, whatever, and it'll figure it out. Views and sprox are also great when I need to do abstraction because my database is used by dozens of apps. With CE, we really think of it as one database to the app. So you can really map things out already and simplify it quite a bit. So we'll see some stuff that we're going to continue to innovate in here and take advantage of a lot of things. So triggers. What if we just had an event? List changed, property changed, table schema changed, right? And you could just add an event handler in your code and write VB C# and have a ball. So we don't have that yet, but those are the kind of things that we're thinking of and we're going to be looking at adding. And that's why we've kind of been holding the line on sprox, views, triggers, and so forth, because if we add them, it's hard to pull them out. And we think we can actually do something much better in that space. And I've got all kinds of information on my blog to deal with the debates, because once a week I'll get that question. So the whole idea, again, is putting the database in your app. We can think about it differently. It's already used in many, many places. We were talking earlier about all the Windows Mobile places. It's default in Windows Mobile 6. It's in ROM on the device. In Windows Mobile 7, it's going to be on the device in ROM as well. On desktop, when Vista shipped, we hadn't made this decision around SQL CE being released. So Windows said, we need a relational database, and Jet's not cutting it for us anymore. We need something else. Can we use that thing? Sure. So how many of you got Vista or are using Vista? You've already got a version of SQL CE on your machine. If you're using MSN Client, Media Center PC, Zune, they've all got SQL CE in it. It's a different version of it, because at that point, it's a different productized version, because at that point, we weren't ready to ship it for everybody. So it's a little goofy, but as you saw, whether it's in Windows or not, it doesn't really matter. It's easy for you to put in your app. And the fact is that you can use different versions side by side. If I've got an app from you and I put another app from you on your machine, you're using 3.1, you're using 3.5, do you really want his app to break you? Because his app, I'm going to call you, and what are you going to do? I don't know. Works fine on my machine. So we support full side by side as well. So we don't don't force you to deal with those updates. And I showed you how it's already the default database for local databases in Visual Studio 2008. And then the scenarios, as you can imagine, even in online, I want to cache. XML, is great for a couple of things. Cookies, yeah, interesting. IE and everybody, there's just customer after customer, internal and external, going, yeah, XML seemed like a great idea. Doesn't scale very well. So a lot of those are switching over to using SQL CE, and we're seeing that with the customers as well. Standalone apps like we talk with Jet, in-memory caches, and I'll do a pretty cool demo at the end around a custom doc format. So it's actually been out for a while. We shipped originally in 2001 as the embedded, for embedded VC and embedded VB. With .NET Compact Framework in 2003, it shipped then. And then you see in 2005 was SQL Server Mobile, and this other one, I started out because the name we used internally has a completely another overloaded name. I won't even go into it there. And that's when last year we basically said, let's just release it for everybody. And that was SQL Server Compact 3.1, and unlocked it for all desktop usage. And 3.5, the main focus is what you saw with the Sync Framework. So you guys heard about the Sync Framework now? So that Sync Services for AD.NET was the first release of that. It was our way to say we need a developer-oriented sync model, because merge was great, DBA focused, not really very developer friendly, not very service-oriented architecture friendly. So we tooled that, put it in Visual Studio, and we're adding additional data sources to that in coming soon. So this was my one marketing slide, just to kind of put the picture of, we were talking about the consistency. We've got SQL Server Express. When you really, really need, didn't mean to overstress that. When you really need a consistent model with SQL Server, we've got, from the largest data center down to the desktop, you can use one of our server-based SKUs. And there you're making a priority on server-based consistency. All right? Same exact things, modulo some features and so forth that only exist in enterprise. Works all the way down to desktop. You can see the clients kind of span across both. On the client spectrum, we can go all the way down to this goofy Hello Kitty doll that apparently runs Windows embedded. I don't know why. I guess somebody decided to do it, and maybe the list of things that it chirps or barks or whatever kitties do. I don't know what this thing does. Up to things that you don't even know whether it's running Windows embedded or Windows desktop. Point of sales, gas stations, media things, things that scan your barcodes when you go into stadiums and so forth. So here with SQL Server Compact, we're doing consistency across all our clients, where deployment is the priority. Okay? So deployment priority with consistency on the client, consistency with the server, deployment is not your priority. Okay? That's our focus on how we do these. And of course, the idea is to synchronize between the two. And it's Express, you can kind of put the line right through the middle of it, because Express can be the client or your entry point to the server platform. And you could synchronize to those. Of course, you could synchronize between servers as well. Now, with caching, the only reason I kind of put this slide up here is I get a lot of questions, and I actually sometimes do a talk specifically on caching models. And there's this model that you can say, well, I'll always work online, and I'll fall offline when the network goes away. Well, it doesn't work very well. So how many of you guys remember, was it Outlook 2000 or Outlook XP? That's exactly what it did. And if you were sending mail and your network died, if the machine didn't completely lock up, your inbox could actually disappear because it wasn't quite synchronized yet. Not a very good experience. So in 2003, they switched it, and you're always working against the local store for your data. Public folders, you work online. I was joking the other day about, certain things are only best when directly ordered. Might be pizza. Can't make pizza very well at home, so I do that online. Certain reports might be only viable to get online. So online, offline, and you can synchronize your local data as well. Now, tools. I talked a bit about tools. I showed you the ability to create databases and tables. We have some maintenance capabilities as well in here. Come over here, and if I just double-click the database, even in Visual Studio, I can go to database properties, and we've got some functionality right here. Shrink, repair, compact. If I do get some corrupted rows, I can recover it. I can even try to recover the corrupted rows. And I can make new copies of it, change the password. Didn't make a very secure password, but I'm okay with that, but it gives me a warning. And so you have some functionality, or a lot of functionality right there. In fact, that functionality is available in APIs as well, and I'll show that in the slide. Now, the same thing is available here in Management Studio, right? I can come over here and say properties, and I get the same thing. Now, when you're writing queries, sometimes those queries can be kind of complex. So here, I'm doing a four-way join between customers, orders, order details, and employees, doing a summation for the total of order details. And I want to make sure this is really going to work. Now, what's interesting is with SQL CE, you're putting the database for a user. So there's no DBAs in the room that are going to come yell at you, but you've probably all been in this where it worked fine for me on my machine, right? You give it to the DBA, and they go, "There's no way I'm putting this on my, on there." Because when you start having multiple users hitting that query at the same time, it starts to thrash. And you have this multiplier of multiple users. With CE, it's the user's database. What you as the developer see is, unless other than the amount of data that's going in, it's going to be the same thing. But you still want to optimize it. So here, I can run the query, But I can also say, include the actual execution plan. So when I run this, we can get the same output we get with SQL Server, so I can kind of see what's happening with the indexes. Is there any optimizations available? And you kind of see I can drill in quite a bit and start to figure out what I can do to make this query run a bit faster. So, and with SQL CE, you will have to work a little bit more than SQL Server. So if you write really good queries on SQL Server, they're going to work fine in SQL CE. SQL Server's got the horsepower. You can throw just about anything at it, and in most of the cases, it could actually give you a good answer. It's going to have to work pretty hard at it, and that's what your DBA is going to come and remind you about that. But if you write good query, you have to just work a little bit harder, write them more efficient, and they'll run more efficient on SQL Server as well. So it's just a matter of we just don't, that's one of the ways we keep the engine small. So execution show plan, right? You get that, you get the properties, and you can kind of drill in there. Now, I showed you the database properties, and here's the SQL CE engine object. How many of you guys have worked with SMO, or SQL management objects? How many like working with SMO? It's not exactly very productive. It can be kind of frustrating. It's very powerful. It's got a lot of stuff in there. We tease it quite a bit internally as well. So here we have a SQL CE engine object that's got a lot more, in fact, JET looking like APIs on it. Compact, repair, verify. In fact, we've added upgrade into it directly in this release as well, because previously in 2.0 to 3.0, we had this external tool. It was kind of stupid, so we said, just put it in the core engine. So what we've also done is fixed up some of our tooling. So now all of our SKUs in 2008 will support SQL Server Compact. In 2005, because we hadn't made this final decision yet, the Express SKUs didn't support it. So we've added the local database. We've got the service-based database for SQL Server, and the main feature we worked on in this release was enabling synchronization with sync services. Now, many of you developers apparently didn't like having to write add relation, alter table, and all this. I don't either. So we did add the relations dialog. We added at the end of the cycle. I'll apologize now before we've actually shipped it yet that the UI wasn't exactly what I had hoped for. We kind of messed up a little bit. So if you press OK after you've typed that in, it won't actually save it. You need to actually make sure you press the add relation dialog, the button there. So we will fix that in a Service Pack 1, but just in case you get bit, it's not a bug. It's just a bad. We have these bugs that we put by design. And we always want to say by bad design, but anyway, we'll fix that one. But that is the way, unfortunately, we're going to ship in this release. Now, tools. We do multi-targeting with Visual Studio. Again, because we ship so often with SQL CE, we don't necessarily get as much functionality in each release. So we didn't get a chance to do all the multi-targeting of tools. Visual Studio 2005, great tooling for SQL CE 3.1. Visual Studio 2008, tooling for 3.5. Tooling does not cross the SKUs. We just weren't able to do all that work. We had to do a lot of cleanup on some things in 2008 and 3.5. We will do this in the future. From a runtime perspective, works perfectly fine. 2005, add a reference. You're working with SQL CE 3.5. Life's good. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that's kind of the things we've done. And now all of our SKUs in Express and above in 2008, both in Visual Studio and Management Studio, will support the SQL CE engine. For those of you that are still using Visual Studio 2005, to get this installed, there are a couple of steps, unfortunately, to make sure you get the full experience. I actually have step-by-step instructions on my blog. But basically what you do is first add SP1 for Visual Studio. That's where we put in some of the hooks. You'll see it change from SQL Server Mobile to SQL Server Compact, but mostly it's just a name change. You didn't actually get the engine yet. So if you, never mind. I go into the ship thing that happened last year. Just go to the SQL Server Compact website, download, install the runtime, 1.5 meg. Get the tools. for Visual Studio for 2005 SP1. And now you're good. Now you get the Click Once Bootstrapper, you get the data directory support, we'll GAC it in the right location, and you'll be good. If you want Management Studio, SQL Server Management Studio, the Service Pack 2 release pulled tooling for SQL Server Compact in as well. So this was just us dealing with the fact that we changed the licensing of SQL Server Compact after we shipped the product. There's just a little bit of quirkiness to do that. Luckily, in 2008, we cleaned this all up. Great motivation to go get it as we release it later this month, and all of this stuff will just go away. All right, great, but how do I put it in my app? So, SQL Server Compact, another quirk of us working focused on device, and desktop was kind of like a secondary thought. Our build lab was using the same version for 3.1 as SQL Server. So anybody notices that 9.0 version, that's the same version of SQL Server 2005. So you can divide by 3. Maybe a Euro conversion, not that bad yet. And that's the 3.1 version. In 3.5, we have fixed it. So you don't usually see version numbers go down, but whatever. That's 3.5, and 3.1's the 9.0 version. And you just do the add reference, and it'll be there. And we actually did name it SQL Server CE. I think it's used to say Microsoft SQL Mobile or something like that, so we fixed that up as well. All right, getting connected, so connection string. For the most part, it's very much like SQL Server, but it's got some differences. First of all, it's only a file path. There's no server to connect to. There's no instance, right? You give it a file path. That's all we can use. And the configuration, because there is no service to configure, this is where you do the configuration. You put it in the connection string. So that's where I talk about add options. Now, we'll show how your data files for apps is not necessarily in the same directory as your executable. So if you've got to give it a fully qualified path and you don't know what that path is, we need a way to help you make that easier. So that's what this data directory macro is. I talked a bit more about it in the Express talk. I'll talk a little bit about it here. And the other thing is on devices, 128 meg was pretty darn big. So what we do is in order to open up a SQL C database from 2 applications, 2 completely separate processes, is we allocate shared memory. Now, when we allocate shared memory, we allocate a percentage of the max database so we can map things out. So that's why we have this optimization here. We default to 128 because we figured that was huge. Who's going to see that? On desktop, 128 is not necessarily that big. Our max database is 4 gig. So you can go bump that up, and I'll just go to the next one here. You can see that here is some connection string properties, and you can go off and change some of those. There's others as well, but I just wanted to highlight a couple here. You see that the fully qualified path, you can give it a fully qualified path if you know it. Many times you don't. So you can use the data directory macro, and we will replace that when running under ASP.NET or running under Click Once. That variable will be set for you automatically. Now the password. So if you give it a password, we encrypt the database. If you encrypt the database, we require a password. So why do we need both? So we're getting rid of the encrypt name value pair. So if you have it, get rid of it. If you give us a password, we're going to encrypt it. If you give us the encrypt thing, we're going to require a password anyway, so there's just no reason to have both. In the future releases, we'll actually start throwing exception. Now we're just going to ignore it. Now, it turns out, so who's a hacker here? Going to admit to it? No, it's saying stealth. So unfortunately, people keep on trying to break the encryption algorithms. So we have to keep on making them better. And we can't necessarily go back to the older operating systems and add the new algorithms to it. So we wanted to support SQL C 3.5 so we could have a consistent engine from Pocket PC 2003 all the way up to Vista or Windows 7 for that matter. So, but we needed to be able to support the older security models, and including Windows 2000 also is the same compatibility there. So you can give it the encryption mode, And we're not allowed to say the actual encryption mode we use, triple DES and all that kind of goo, so we have to obfuscate it, whatever. So there's platform default, whatever the operating system you're running on, or the SQL CE engine, that version, it's default. Or you can tell it, I'm going to be copying this down to a Pocket PC 2003 or a Windows 2000 box. So even though I'm on Vista or Windows Server right now, use the Pocket PC compat mode, so when I send the file to that device, it's still going to work. Those encryption modes will still work on Windows Server, Windows Server, Vista, and so forth. So they move forward, but they're not as secure as the newer ones. Talk about the max database size, buffer size, how much is the database cache. The max database size is our shared memory cache. Probably way more detail we need to get into now, but you can bump that up. You can open an exclusive mode, read-only. So if you're opening it from a CD, pretty cool to be able to just, hey, I've got a product catalog on this CD. I'm just going to run it right from there. I don't need to copy it to the hard drive. A locked USB drive, right? All that'll just work. So you just open it and read-only, and then you tell us what temporary directory we should use for, indexes or other things on the fly. I wanted to make this so you can actually, we automatically figure out what your temp directory is, but we didn't get it done. So just add this there. And then flush interval. So flush interval is another interesting one. How many have a device that has a hard drive on it? Right? Spindles spinning, it could be a gyro, I guess. You kind of figure out where you're going. Hard drives are great because they have lots of storage, but they require lots of battery power, or power in general. So on devices, they've been using flash-based ROM. Laptops are starting to use flash-based ROM too now also. You can actually get laptops that don't have hard drives at all. It's just flash ROM. So a lot better battery consumption. But flash ROM's a lot better in battery, but we still need to optimize it more. Every time you write to it, it uses some power. Every time you write to it, it degrades just a little bit. So what we've done is we've optimized right from the days of using it on devices that we have an interval of when we actually commit the changes to disk, quote and disk, right? So that's what the default is, 10 seconds. You make a change, every 10 seconds we'll take whatever you've given us and we'll flush it. Now you can force it, you can reduce the quantity. This is all about the battery consumption. So people that are running laptops using SQL Express, right? Great product. Wasn't really designed to run off a battery. Maybe a UPS for a couple of minutes while the power recycles. But here with SQL CE, we're much, much more efficient because we were designed that way. We were designed for things to get dropped and batteries to get to die or just shut off. So it's just got a different resiliency model. All right, data directories. Let's kind of do a quick demo here in this. So let's see, SQL CE deployment. What I've got here is I got this project, and I've got it pre-set up. Now, if I run it just under F5, we'll see that I gotta change this picture. Sorry, just way too dated. Some of these people actually work at Microsoft, so it's kind of funny looking at their old picture. Anyway, so if we notice, there's this app domain. So when I run under F5, it's just blank. So if you notice, the database path is just // It actually happens to be in the same directory. And if we look at the code there, we'll see that, and I'll do this in a, actually I did it here. So app domain, current domain, get data. There's a property bag that's part of the app domain. When you run under ASP.NET or you run under click once, the hosting process will set that value. So then when I do a connection string and get the database property off of it, we can pull up that macro and pull it out. You guys are laughing like I left some comment in here that I'm going to be embarrassed about. So let's now run this with under click once. I've got it right here. So now when I run under click once, that app domain has been set for me. And in under click once, it's this very long GUID thing that I challenge anybody to try to type that in from scratch. You can take the picture. I still challenge you to type it in from scratch. So, and then if I ask the full database path, notice it pulls it straight out of it. So, oh wait, I got to change that picture again. So just an easy way to use that. All of the APIs are actually built into SQL C Engine to actually leverage that data directory. For those of you that, well, I'll save that comment for my next demo. So now here, when you need to create a database in code, now in my Express talk, I talked about how we create a SQL Express data file on the fly. Deploying database files as part of your project, unless they're read-only, bad idea. Because you're going to send some code out, some data out. Your user's going to make a change to it. You and your project want to make a change, and files don't have a great merging capability. So you're going to blow away a user's data if you're not really careful. So in the Express talk, I actually spent more time talking about script-based deployment. I'll do a shorter version of it here. But here's a good example of where SQL CE was always designed for this model. The SQL CE engine object, I simply give it a connection string. The connection object, I can ask it for the database property, which will expand out the data directory, the fully qualified path. I can then see if the file exists, because with SQL CE, a database is a file, and a file is a database. And if not, I call the engine, I say create database. There's no user instance to connect to. There's no master database I have to go find and do detaches and all these things. Very, very clean. And then I run a script for create my initial databases. And I'll do that demo in a minute. So now, how many of you have tried to use SQL C under ASP.NET? Anybody? See, recognize this? Yeah. So why? Well, first, let's kind of go into a little bit. Let me do the demo here. Oops. So what I've got here is I got a web project, and very similar code here. In the button, I'm going to basically try to open it. If the database exists, great, we'll set some color. If it doesn't, I'm going to create it on the web server. But I've got it in a try catch, and we'll see why. So view in browser. And now I try to open the connection, poof, right? So what we've done here, how many people have deployed websites with JET, access databases? You can admit to it. It's okay. It's not, yeah, now he's raising his hand. Right. Yeah, we're trying to make it really obvious it's a bad idea. In fact, here's the full exception if I don't try catch it. Now, it's not that, the problem is people start using JET and they have no idea that it's not going to scale when their site takes off to thousands of concurrent users. If it's a small little Beanie Baby site or whatever the goofy thing is now selling ducks for Popfly, I don't know. Actually, maybe Popfly, they're more popular now. It's perfectly fine, right? You don't have the concurrency issues, and it's probably a lot easier to change your code later on than it is to start dealing with a server that I just don't need right now. With SQL CE, we knew that people were struggling between making a choice between JET and SQL Express, or SQL Server for that matter, in places. And we wanted to make sure we put a sign up that says, hey, this is not what we were designed to do. We were trying to be an in-proc client database. You can use it as an in-proc database on a server, on a web server as well. Just realize it's not what it was designed for. We can't make a 1 megabyte engine perform like SQL Server can. But if you have scenarios you want to do it, small sites where you're fine with the limitations of, and when I say limitations, I'm saying practical limitations. We don't have the same kind of locking scheme that SQL Server does. If you have lots of people making writes at the same time, we're going to get locked up. If lots of people are reading, it's fine. So toggle a bit, and now we're fine. Delete the database, create the database, life's good. All I did, and this is documented, and it was funny because when I was first doing this, I worked in the team that was in the UIFX team where we do ASP.NET also. Half the team loved it and couldn't wait to use it, and you can just deploy the DLLs, the engine, the databases, life's good. The other team's like, wait a second. So we decided to do this, and then I called it soft block. And people were just freaking out, going, oh, LCA is legal, is going to freak out. You can't do a soft block. What does that mean? Well, this is fully documented. Just think of this as a sign that says when you get that exception, it's like, just realize what you're using here. This is not meant to be SQL Server with all of its scale and performance. If your sites are small and you're doing it, running your own service, running a log reader kind of thing, whatever you want to do, fine. Simply flip that bit in the app domain property bag. When we see that, we will no longer throw an exception. It's that simple. Okay. So this is just kind of some comments here. So we didn't want to be a back-end database. It was really around when you're doing replication or even synchronization, it's faster to send down a full database when you're doing that initial database creation. So a lot of times that's a best practice is you got a couple hundred megabytes, whatever, create the database on the server, stream down the file, and then start bringing incremental changes down. So that's a prime scenario where we want to enable it. But there's other scenarios, like I said, small websites. If you need to do it, that's fine. It's just not what we were focused on. All right, populating schema. So now I want to deploy this, but I actually, like I said, we don't want to deploy files because files get overwritten on the user side, and I need to merge in my changes. So the best practice is to deploy as scripts to actually create the database on the fly. Let's take a look here. So what I've got here is I've got this project, and notice I've got a script here for creating tables and then doing inserts. One of the things you'll notice is we don't do the semicolon delimited way to do inserts or updates or deletes or multiple commands. When you're working against SQL Server and you're making a possible network trip, it's important to be able to make smaller or fewer trips. And you want to batch together a bunch of things. And it's worth us to do the text parsing, to do the security threat modeling, to make sure that you guys don't do, not you, but your customers don't do injection attacks. When the database is in proc with your app, you don't have those network hops. There's no real benefit to doing that. So just execute a bunch of commands in a loop. You can put them in a transaction so you get the same benefits, but we just don't support that multiples there. So then what we do is, nope, not that. Here, we're going to execute some scripts. In fact, let me just run this, and I'll walk through it in code. So first, I'm just going to delete the database so I have a nice, clean place to work with. Now, I'll dim the database utilities. We'll come back to that in a second. And I'm sorry, I'm down here. So I'll create a connection object, and I've got my connection string here. And notice it's got data directory in there. And then I'll check for the property of it, whether it exists. Now I'm running under F5, so my data directory is the same as my app. If I was under click once, it would give me that long GUIDed path. If it was under ASP.NET, it would say C, INET, pub, blah, blah, blah. If it exists, just delete it. There's no drop database, just delete the file. There's no log file, oops. There's no log file to worry about. It's just a single file format. So now I want to create the database. So I'll step in and I'll create these database utilities. I'm going to initialize the database. And in the initialized database, I'm, again, using the connection object, making sure my database physically exists. And I'll now create it. Simple single API, create database. The SQL CE engine is a type that we ship. It's not something that's in my code here. And then I can step through and create the database. Again, getting a connection. I'm going to use the string split to be able to split up all those commands. And if I look here, commands, and expand it out, you can see I've got my create tables and my inserts in just an array. And I've just done a split based on Go, carriage return, line feed. I just loop through those commands and just execute them. Boop, 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 boop. And now I've got my database. I've got my tables. And I've got some data in there, and I even have some database info. So it turned out that it's sometimes difficult to figure out on a database that I get from somebody else what encryption mode it's using, what the locale would be. So we're starting to implement a dictionary that has some of those name value pairs in there as well. We'll populate that with more information as we improve the product. But very simple, create the database, populate it with schemas. I don't have to worry about a create database script. I can use the engine to do that. And then I just use scripts in my project. Scripts are right here. They're just an embedded resource. I don't want this thing sitting on disk for somebody to go mess with. Part of my app. And on my blog, I also I go through some step-by-step instructions on how to add that to a resource and so on and so forth. Okay. So you can populate the schema with Visual Studio, right? We did that before with the Flintstones. Same thing in Management Studio. You can use replication, merge replication, RDA being a sync technology unique to SQL CE. We are phasing that out, though. We believe sync services is going to just replace any need for RDA. It's still fully supported in this product. We're just giving you a heads up. We'd like to phase that out. Anybody using RDA today? All right, then you don't see it on the slide. Just use sync services. We have migration tools coming. We're going to release these to the web directly. We're talking about even making this open source so you guys can just play with it directly. And in that tool, you can take a SQL CE database, and we will script out and create a SQL Server database for you. You can take a SQL Server database, and we'll create a SQL CE database for you. So we'll have this tool that goes back and forth. All we use is ADO.NET. It's not rocket science. It's just we put together all the UI and the functionality. There are some great tools out there already. The guys from PrimeWorks did some great work here. You can download their tool. Now, there are some consistent. We are part of SQL Server. We definitely want to leverage some of the, leverage the things that apply. But we have some unique features we could take advantage of as well when a database is in proc with your app. Some of the things that Jet was really good at doing. So we've got full support for table adapters and type data sets and all of that kind of stuff. So all that drag and drop stuff I showed you. We have full support for link. And when I say, full support, it's the link constructs. We unfortunately didn't get a chance to finish up the designer for link to SQL. Now you could argue with link to SQL for SQL CE, since the database is already part of my app and all the tables that are in it are really part of my app anyway. Do I really need to have a designer to say, I don't need that table, I don't need this table? Because that's important on SQL Server. So I won't say it's an intention. It's an interesting excuse. But you can use SQL Metal to actually generate the scripts pretty easily. Now, link to entities that are coming first half of next year, we do have planned support to have a designer. Now, we are planning at this time. Last time, we didn't plan to have even link to SQL working for SQL CE. So the fact that we didn't get a designer wasn't too much of a surprise. Here we do plan. We didn't ship it yet, so I'm definitely putting the quotes around that one there. Now, scrollable, updatable cursors. Like I said, once the database is in process with the app, why do I got to make a copy of it? So if you think about data sets, linked to entities, linked to SQL, they're making a copy of the data. They sit in memory, right? When you're talking against a shared database, that's probably what you need to do, especially when you want to send it across the wire to the client. But here, it's my copy. I already probably made a copy from the server into SQL CE. I don't need to make another copy. So what we can do is do more of the ADO result set kind of like programming model here. So I'll create a connection as a SQL CE connection. And I'm doing it to form scope because, not way up there. And here I'll just instance it. Now I can give it the my.settings.northwind connection string, right? And that's the right way to do it, or properties.settings.default.northwind connection string. But all it is data source equals, data directory. Spell it right. There you go. Well, I have to make it really hard to put the double backslashes there for C#, but VB I don't have to. So whatever. All right, check to see if the connection's open. State unequal open. Okay, all should look very familiar to you. And that's because we are using the same programming model. The thing is, we put this in a different namespace. There's SQL client, and there's SQL Server CE as the namespace that all these types live in. So now I need a command. Command.connection equals the connection. And then I got to give it the query text. Now, I can do command text equals, and I can give it, well, let me do the query first, right? So I could come over here, and I could come over and say, hey, you know what? I want to make a query. Now, I could do link, but I want to show some other stuff here as well. So I'll say employees, employee ID, last name, first name, and sure, title. So I'll copy this. All right, we can execute this. We make sure it works, right? So we do all our testing right here in Visual Studio. And then I can just copy and paste it into here. Get rid of the line wrapping, and we won't worry about the rest of that there. So now I just say, I've got my command, I've got it set up. And now I just say command.execute result set. So this is a new thing that's unique to SQL CE. And I could say, actually, let me put this on my binding source. Me.employees binding source.data source will be the result. And we will do it this way. Scrollable. Hold on. Try to make this so it doesn't wrap on you here so you can see it. Or updatable. Okay? So I actually can make scrollable and updatable cursors. So I'm going to data bind directly to the data in the database. No copies. As data is made in the database, I'm just seeing it. Very easy. I've made it updatable. I can make it insensitive also. It's not rude. It's just it won't pay attention to the case sensitivity. Some things don't actually translate very well. And now we could run it. In fact, I'm actually going to run it under Control F5. I'm going to run 2 instances of it. So now when I load the data, I'm looking at the data directly in the database. In fact, if I come over here and I make Andrew mo full because he has had lunch already, and as soon as I go back and read over that row, I see the data directly. All right? In fact, if I come over here to this other version and I put him back to fuller, and I move off the row and I come back and read it again, 2 completely separate processes working against the same data file, and I can see it. There's no lots of extra code here in this project. That's it. I got my update statement. There's no data set refreshing kind of thing going on. I'm just data binding directly to it. So pretty cool how you can kind of work directly with that. The one thing you probably saw it's missing is I had to go back and reread the cell on the grid. So that's the eventing thing I was talking about. What we want to do is we want to take it and just raise data binding events for a list change, property change. And that's the kind of thing we can do with an in-proc database. We don't have to worry about the scalability of having to maintain connections against a multi-user database that's supposed to be stateless. We can really do some pretty interesting things here. So, scrollable, updatable cursors. They're a cursor against the row set. You can do a join, or we can do table direct. I'll show that in a second here. Which is, if you do that, you can actually completely bypass the query processor, which is my next demo here. So there's this model called ISAM access. And it's basically where you're working directly against the data. And what I'll do is I'll run, I don't know what that was. I'll run this. And what I have here is I have a list of data. My Flintstones going. I got more of the family going here. And I'm data bound directly at. Now I can go back and get the list of indexes. And not only can I work directly against the data, but I could sort it as well. So what I've done here is I'm populating that list box with a query from one of our information schema tables. Right? And I can go back and get the indexes for the customer table, and I'm filtering out because when I do primary keys, it creates another constraint that shows up in here as well. So I'm trying not to get the duplicates. And then I'll do an order by. Then on the selected index changed, I'll go back and reload that. So all I need to do is here, instead of writing a query, I said, hey, work directly against the customers table, table direct, right? And then I'll say command index name equals me.index name combo box or list box dot text. Okay? And then do the scrollable updatable result set. Notice up here, I made it scrollable for the list of indexes. It's not updatable, so I just made it scrollable. So now when I run this, I can see my indexes change, or my list changing based on the index I've selected. And I can do compound indexes. I can say first name and last name and city and blah, blah, blah. I'll go all the way down that. So working directly against the data, it's about as fast as you possibly can get access to it. All in proc, multiple processes, very, very fast. And just kind of a recap of it here, highlighting it's the command.index name. Right? Now you can't do joins because we're not using the query processor in this case. So you're going directly against the data. But in SQL CE, many times what we do is you take SQL Server where you have your data shredded across 5 tables for major normalization, and in SQL CE you go, the person has an address, has a phone number in one row. And it's just a way to make things more efficient. So you can kind of do things in different ways. All right, I already did the deployment one, but let me go through some of the elements of what I was doing there, because I talked a little about before how I was going to drill into this. Now, I privately deployed SQL CE in that Click Once demo when we did the first demo. Now, if I'm trying to roll my app out, and IT is, I need IT to roll out SQL CE, and they're like, yeah, we'll get to that next summer. We got a planned rollout happening. I can deploy this up to my web server, send an email to my customers, and go use it. So I don't really need you. But they want to roll it out, so that's fine. So what you can do is roll it out privately. The way the global assembly cache and the .NET loader works is if it sees that version with that signature in the GAC, when it gets loaded, it'll load that version first. So you can go and deploy it privately until IT catches up, and then you can detect that, you can start pulling it back out. So this enables you to get a painless deployment until IT catches up with you. Right? Now, just as a reminder, the managed reference, you want to change it to copy local true. And here is where you get it. So I've highlighted a directory. So with SQL CE 3.1, we actually created its own program files. With SQL Mobile 3.0, it was buried in the VS directory. So that was one of the things that we changed back then. So I've highlighted it's either 3.1 or 3.5, depending on what version you want to use. You grab those DLLs, the SQL CE star. I don't have a slide here. I've got it on my blog of the list of DLLs. For if you're not doing merge replication or RDA, or if you're not using native with OLEDB, there's 3 DLLs that you can get rid of that are like 300K. So that's how you get down to the 1 megabyte. If you're not going to use the compact API, you get rid of that one. That's another 70K. Now, if you do this private deployment, it's not visible by Microsoft Update. We're not going to go muck with your machine, possibly break your app. Security fix, thank you. Well, they really have a security problem. So we feel comfortable, knock on wood, I hope this is wood, we're not going to have problems because it doesn't run as a network service. It doesn't listen to network ports. It's only loaded when your app is running. So it doesn't have nearly the kind of surface area that we had with MSDE and the problem that we probably all know about. And if you don't, that's fine too. So we're just going to try to forget that one. Now, So when you do that, we're not going to service it. We can't see it, which also means that we're not going to necessarily break it. So what you can do is, as developers, you can get the update. You're going to have it MSI'd on your machine. Just why not? And when you get a Windows update, if you were to ever get a Windows update, then you could put those DLLs in your app, test your app, update your app, and you're good to go. For IT places, you can roll it out centrally as well, and that one will be detected, and you can service it that way. The majority of our customers are privately deploying it. Like I said, you probably have it on your machine already. You don't even know it. Now, how do I deploy this, right? I got to deploy this. Once I deploy it, how do I secure it? Anybody got Office on their machine? How do you secure Word documents or Excel documents? They're just documents, right? They're locked on the machine. The user logs in. They got, ACLs on them. You can even use the Windows encrypted file system. With SQL CE, it's a doc format as well. So let's take a look here. So we showed a little bit of the password protection here. What I've got is I've got this project here, and it's just a little utility that I use for opening and viewing databases. Now I'm going to do an open and select my Northwind database here. And this one's not password protected, so I can just open it and start poking at it, right? If I try to open another one that is password protected, my secured employees, and I try to open it, poof, it's got no password, so it's going to fail. I'll give it my very secure password here, and I'm now in. And I can see my employees' data. Now that's good. I can actually password protect it, so that password be in my app, so my average user couldn't sit there in Visual Studio and start poking at my data file unless they know their password. This is how Jet works with, like Money, I think still uses Jet, Microsoft Money. Now, what happens when I want to go one step further? I actually want to get something encrypted with the Windows encrypted file system. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come over to the file system. I'm going to take my secured employees, and I'll go to the Advanced tab, and I'll say Encrypt. It's just a flag to Windows. Did I close it? Oh, it blew up. Hold on. Did something wrong. And I'll press OK. And I'll say the file only. And if I come back over, we'll see it's now safe and green, right? Green is safe. Now, because it's me, and encrypted it for me, I can still open it. Secured employees. I gotta give it the password, right? Because that's one level of security. And now I can get access to it. Now, I happen to be admin on this box, right? And I really am admin, right? If I try to open a database that was in, EFS encrypted by another user on this laptop, even though I'm admin, I still can't open it. This is not a SQL CE exception. It's Windows saying, I'm not giving you a file handle that. I don't care what you're doing. Windows has no idea it's a database. It doesn't care. So you could say, well, that's the file open dialog. I can just open it in code, right? Well, no. Windows is still being asked for a file handle for that, and it's not going to give it to you. So you can actually secure things with the Windows encrypted file system here easier with SQL Server Compact because that's what was originally designed to do. With SQL Server, again, awesome product, probably some of the best security models in the business for a server. If you communicate to SQL Server over the network, you can do user-level encryption, you can do column-level encryption, you can do multiple roles, you can do object levels. It wasn't designed to get on the box. If you get in the data center and get on the box, most people will say game over. Now, we're adding some security features to SQL Server, but it wasn't designed to be running on the user's machine. We were with SQL CE. So we just intrinsically have security models that are just more natural to that document-centric format. So just a quick recap, right? So you got the password protection, passwords in the database file, and you can leverage the Windows encrypted file system. Now here's my last demo. It's kind of cool. So we're talking about some recipes over here. Now, how many of you have apps that you want to save some data, and you just want to, you have a project file that you actually do things in? Anybody doing stuff like that, right? But if you want to be able to double-click the file and just open it up, or maybe email it to somebody. So here, there's a reason I got Outlook up here. I'm going to send some recipes of things that I've got here. So I can just double-click this file, and that file association is set up with my app, and now I can go open it. Right? So pretty straightforward. We do this with documents all the time. So SQL C, single file, code-free, probably one of the last file formats that's actually code-free. You don't have to worry about running some macro or something in it. File format. So you can just secure it, email it, and so forth. So how did I do that? Well, all I did was simply capture the command line arguments. So I'm using the VB one here, but in the in application command lines in C# in the startup class, you can do that as well. If the command line count is greater than 0, I set it to a settings file, settings property. I just set the file name so that later on in my code, I come over here and what I do is I pass it to the data access layer. Here we go. I give it the recipe data file name from my settings class. And then when I go and load recipes, I'm just going through. In fact, let's see, I got a result set, scrollable and updatable. Right? Here, I'm loading by an individual ID. I'm using the index name, so I'm bypassing the query processor. I'm actually doing a set range, which is another API in there, so I can take the entire table, bypass the query processor, going straight to the indexes, and I want to use only index rows that equal this value. So now, when I run that, oh, didn't mean to do that, that I can just double-click these files. In that case, it was on email. Here, I've got one here. Why did I get that one? Did I change my Vegas recipes? I did. Oh, well. Good food at Barcelona. Where's my recipes? Anyway, so what I can do, though, is if I want to save it, I want to save as another one. I'll do save as. I'll give it yet another. And all it's going to do is just write out another file. It's just a file. Now, I could just do a file copy. But the problem is that I've actually got that set up as an open connection. I can't copy files with Windows while the file handle is open. So what I do is I will use the SQL C engine object to create the database. So I actually have more code here just dealing with the file open dialog, that once I finally get that, I can actually say, go here. And again, I'll use the SQL C engine object. And I'm going to use the compact API because it has the ability to compact to another connection string. Right? Pretty straightforward. Now, here's another cool feature that came in Click Once with Visual Studio 2008. So many people wanted to use Click Once, but Click Once didn't support custom file associations. So now what I can do is if I go to View UAC Settings, in here we have some manifest entries that when Click Once, in Visual Studio, when I publish a Click Once file, will merge in the elements here into that project. So that's where I can specify the extensions and put the description, and I have to deal with the prog ID because Windows still needs that. This is what shows up in the documents for the description there. Right. Vegas recipes, here you go, my recipes. So all this you can kind of build right into Click Once using SQL Server Compact. All right. So doc format, structured, right? XML is fine, doesn't scale very well. Here we can actually open in multiple threads. You can change the extension to map to your app, password protected, use the encrypted file system, and you can leverage Click Once to associate that as well. So some runtime enhancements. Like I said, the main thing we were focused on this release was enabling a developer-focused sync framework. So sync services, first release of the first portion of the sync framework. Full link support. We added the timestamp, row version data type, a bunch of query functionality, including set identity insert, which turned out to be pretty important. System transactions. We talked about the encryption and the SQL CE engine APIs. And to wrap up, it's free, it's fast, it's encryptable, it's safe. It's easy to program, single file, right? Great replacement of JET, persistent data sets. We love SQL Server. If SQL Server is working fine for you in Express, fine. If you're finding that you're having problems and you're feeling you have to jump to XML, we've got a great solution here. Right? Integrated in SP1 of 2005, 2008, fully integrated. Management Studio coming. I got a bunch of resources here on my blog, so you can drill it from there, or you can go to the Compact sites. Bill Vaughn's written a book on hitchhikersguides.net. It's an ebook. I think he's 10, 15 bucks, something like that. Great book. Rafiq has got some stuff on the Sync Guru or Synchronizer site. And of course, we have the Sync Dev Center. We've got some other talks coming. So we have this Tell Us Where It Hurts on Thursday. It'll be interesting. And then Philip will wrap up some stuff on Friday with some replication best practices and what's coming in Sync services or Sync framework. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you. And please fill out the evals. Those help us. It's always great to hear what you liked in this session. I hope this was helpful. And with that, I'll wrap up and I'll take some questions. So thank you. Yes?
How do we get at it in other applications without having to actually code anything? People are used to working with MDF files, for example, but they can use that data in any Office application, etc. You can connect to any kind of OLEDP source in Excel.
Okay.
Extract the data. I know there is an OLEDP provider, but it's just not feature-rich enough for what's required in order for Office to connect via OLEDP, for example.
Right, right. So the question was kind of, I've got these SDF files now, and I want to get access to those from Office apps in addition to my custom apps. Because my custom apps, I can use ADO.NET, I connect to it, life's good. So with the Office apps, we do have an OLEDB implementation. It was designed for devices. OLEDB is more coincidental on what it's supported on here than it's supposed to be intentional. So when we move that code to desktop, because the same code base, bang, we have OLEDB. It's not necessarily what people expect. We've been thinking a lot around how much we want to enhance OLEDB for SQL CE versus really just kind of focus on the managed code stuff. With Visual Studio Tools for Office, you can use ADO.NET to get access to it. So you can actually extend all of those, and there's some great Visto sessions here where they talk about how you can extend all the Office kind of document models to get access to it. So yeah, you want to leverage the designers that just know how to pick an OLEDB kind of thing, right? Yeah, we're not there. And I don't know when and how and if we will get there just yet. So that's why when the gentleman asked me earlier, we're talking about JET, how it's really, there's a lot of things we're really close, but we're not completely there yet. That's why I made that caveat, is all of like Access and Office that have all these great, hey, give an OLEDB path to something, we're not plumbed into that yet, and we need to figure out the best way to do that going forward. Yes? SQL Server and SQL C data types. So question is, what do we support in SQL C for data types? So it kind of falls into that rich subset, and I just didn't put the slide up on there. There's some docs on that. Generally speaking, we kind of bring things down to a subset / superset. So for instance, we don't support single byte and double byte. We only support double byte characters. So there's no varchar, there's only n varchar. So we can kind of bring things down and get it there. We don't have the XML data type. We bring it down into n text. So those are the kind of things that we've simplified or streamlined some of our data types. With 3.5, we didn't get the time to do like the new date time 2, date time offset, spatial types yet. Our plan was to ship right after SQL Server Katmai and add that functionality. So For the most part, you can kind of bring them down into them. In fact, the date time when we sync those in, we're going to bring them in as NVAR cars. When you start merge replication and sync stuff in Service Pack 1. So that's where we're at today. We want to have a robust ability to work with the SQL Server data types. In most cases, they just come down into these other data types, but we don't have them all. Let me get, yes?
What is the time frame for the tool for porting from Express to
So you said the word events in there, and I went off a tangent.
Okay, the time frame for getting the events from SQL updates.
Oh, so the eventing I was referring to. We're planning it for our next release. So don't even worry about it for now. No. I'm not even ready to start talking. We're just finishing up this release, and we're working on our service pack. So I debated even mentioning it, but I wanted to kind of explain why we haven't rushed to implement Sprox views triggers. Is we're really trying to take the database, keep it compact, and put it into the app. And that's why we've been pushing back on that, and we're thinking about it in this way. So that's all future release stuff. We have no date yet. We're still debating it. We're not debating it, just figuring out. Right now, we're working on our Service Pack 1. 64-bit's been a really important thing. Integration with SQL Server 2008. So right now, that's the team's main focus, and we're doing some other early investigation and early prototyping and some of that stuff. So we're comfortable we want to do that. We're not ready to announce any kind of timelines, betas, or anything yet on that. But definitely keep an eye on my blog or the Compact Team blog, and as we're ready to start talking about that stuff, we'll definitely start making announcements.
Then my second question was, what is the time frame for porting Express database definition?
Oh, that migration wizard I talked about? Because we're going to release to the web, there's good and bad. It means that we didn't get rushed to put it in this release, and it's not necessarily part of SP1. I've actually got it running on my laptop. I don't know. I'm hoping in the next couple of months. I was going to say weeks, but that's not the case. Soon. That is actually, and that I can actually give you a soon date as opposed to the eventing. I'm just saying somewhere in the future. Yeah, Visual Studio is releasing later this month, and we're done. We're just kind of like putting little stickers on it and stuff right now. The tools is coming, and it's just a matter of they have to do the posting to Microsoft.com. It's like a huge process, and we'll get that up there pretty soon. But PrimeWorks has actually got a pretty cool tool also, so I could definitely recommend them. I don't remember what the pricing is. It wasn't that much. Yeah, it's not free. So, yeah. We have a lot of freedom to make things free. Others don't. How many here want to work for free? So, yes? Yeah, so that was in the data type stuff. We don't have spatial support today. We want to do in the future. I'll put it in the same bucket as the eventing at this point. It's not something. It's not a trivial thing for us to add. We definitely want to, but it's not something we can just slim into a service pack. There's some good partners out there that are already doing spatial stuff with SQL CE. They just do their own management. They're just shredding it themselves, blobbing it, and putting it in their own columns to do the indexing, and they have their own custom indexes in there. So there are some great. It's not that the engine can't support it. There are some companies out there doing a lot of work with it. Just we haven't made it an intrinsic type into the engine as of yet. Yes?
The functionality you talked about on the Management Studio, the script options and all that stuff, do they work?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I meant to mention that. So today, we don't have the right-click generate scripts. And another really stupid gotcha that's always annoyed me is you can't actually change a column name right now in the tools either, or even in the engine. So if you've misspelled the name of a column, you have to drop the column and delete it in the UI and re-add it again. Of course, it now falls at the bottom of the list. So, and then if you have to recreate the database, we don't have scripts yet either. So the migration tool that I was talking about here, that'll actually generate the scripts. It won't be right-click into Visual Studio Management Studio yet, but we will have that tool, and we want to get there. You're saying there is one? Like you know of one I don't know about? Or? As far as I know, Oh, the web publishing tools. Yeah, the web publishing tools, they're actually done and out, but they don't work for SQL C. That's specifically for SQL Server. Um, we're a relatively small team, shipping quickly, so certain things we can get out quickly, other things we just wind up on a back burner, and we will get that. I'd love to see if any partners want to create a tool that can integrate in Visual Studio through the Visa program. I'd be glad to recommend you, because we're not actually able to do that quick. Our migration tool is going to be a standalone exe that you can just run and generate the scripts. So we'll have that. Yeah?
It's fantastic that you're supporting both link to SQL and link to entities with SQL Compact. How far are you going? Will that be available on devices?
I knew you were going there. So we, the SQL CE team, are not, we're kind of the storage engine kind of thing. And we're actually doing the work with the data programmability team to do that work. Whether it runs on the Compact framework isn't actually up to us. That's really up to the combination of the Compact framework and the SQL data programmability team, and whether they're ready to take that on. The Compact framework team really didn't want to do that in Orcus because they just didn't have the space. So that's why it's kind of frustrating for me, and that's why I really do my demos on the results set and to some extent the data set, because as you saw in my marketing slide, we're trying to show we have consistency across the whole spectrum of clients, and we don't with link to SQL and link to entities. So, and those are cool. They're definitely cool technologies, but there's a lot of layers in there, and the performance isn't necessarily the best when you go through those. So it works great. The link to objects works in Compact Framework, and I think that's awesome. I think link to dataset works in Compact Framework as well. Yeah, so it's a good question for the Compact Framework guys. When they do it, we'll be more than happy to put the provider there, but it's not something that we own to can do right away. It's lunch, so if people want to leave, I'll keep on talking, but I don't want to hold anybody up that wants to go. I'll stick around. There's no other speaker coming in right away, is there? Okay, so I'll keep talking. I'll keep answering. I'm not chasing you out, but thank you. Please fill out the evals. I appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah. I'm sorry? Yes.
Only doing reads.
Yeah.
A lot of cases only doing reads. You recommend using Compact instead of.
I want to be really careful not to recommend, but I won't. But I'm not going to tell you we don't. It's not a license or anything kind of restriction. We haven't done a lot of perf testing. We haven't focused on it right now. We know that if you're doing a lot of writes, that our optimizer doesn't do a lot of. We do. It's not page locks, but we'll get locked up there. If you're doing reads, we don't have the same kind of problems. We technically support the 256 connections, because who the hell's if you got 256 connections in a client app, you screwed up somewhere. So I think it's around 60 is when practical it starts to fall off and curve, which is still plenty. So my comment would be test it under your scenario and it works fine. That's great. Don't try to use this as a replacement for SQL Server. If you have an opportunity to use SQL Server, and you could even use SQL Server Express, that would be a recommendation. If you're trying to run something from a CD, or you've got a small little thing, and that makes sense, then that would be great. So that's the best way I can answer that question. It's like a standard perf question. How do I know what your data is going to be? And but that's the conflict. Is the reads were fine. It's the writes that we start to get hung up on the locks. Yeah.
At the moment, I'm using Visual Studio 2008 Beta 2.
Okay.
Am I using the latest sort of compact stuff for experimenting with that I can at the moment?
Yeah, we had a very small distribution of a release candidate, but we're about to launch. By the time I got you, I could actually email you the bits, but in the next couple of weeks, you'll be able to get the final release. So I just recommend waiting for that. Yeah, so SQL Server Compact is in the Visual Studio 2008 box. It's, as you saw, the designer and everything is all in there. So we're actually waiting for them. We're all ready to post to the web, and we do our final test passes and everything. And as soon as they post, we'll post. So you can get it in Visual Studio, or you can download us directly from the web and using Visual Studio 2005. You won't get the tooling, but you'll get all the coding scenarios and everything. Absolutely. Yeah.
associated with having another table data, and those kind of programs.
I'm not sure I understand.
Let's say you're update table.
Oh, update table 1, doing a select from table 2. I haven't played with it that much. You should be able to do it, but again, we don't have all the full syntax support of SQL Server, so you might have to find the right subset, and I do have to apologize. Our docs have not been up to par as much as I would like as well. Unfortunately, some of it is trial and error. So if it works in SQL CE, it'll work in SQL Server. So it's just a matter of finding the subset that we actually support. But as far as I know, maybe you can confirm, I'm pretty sure we do updates with a join. But I'm not positive. It's been a while since I played with that. Yeah.
Can we expect to be able to make the same T-SQL statements as in Express server?
I'm sorry. Will we be able to
do the same T-SQL statements
as SQL Server and Express? No. So again, SQL Express is SQL Server. So it supports a much larger amount of T-SQL than we support. But but other than from a T-SQL programming model and SQL statements, it's a subset. So whatever works in SQL CE will work in SQL Server. In fact, if you get it running in SQL CE, and it's going to run fast, it's going to run that much, run fast in SQL Server as well. We don't have, bad query and you got to change it to be a good query on SQL Server. SQL Server has got so much horsepower, you can throw shit at it and it's still going to figure it out. It's just we don't have that kind of optimizer in it. So if you run it here, you can run it in SQL Server Express. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. And we're adding more syntax. So when we did the link stuff, because it has all these high-level abstractions, it can't figure out how to write the best query. So we had to do all of this nested join, nested from, subscribe. It was just that list of stuff that you saw there. 80% of it was to support the link stack, and was perfectly fine. It's not that developers didn't want that on devices. It wasn't required. You can write queries without that, but we added it so you can get there. No, we've got OLADB with the limited conversation we talked before. We're not going to. So ODBC generally is our standard. We're trying to go more standard on ODBC. So I don't want to make it sound like we're trying to be different here. We're debating on how much we add more functionality for native access. So how many of you guys doing native development? You guys, and maybe you have existing. Anybody doing new projects in native? So that's kind of what we're seeing. So why do we want to spend a bunch of time for people who are not investing much in that? We as Windows, seem to be the most use of it because we still have a lot of native code there. We haven't rewritten the operating system and managed code yet. So that's kind of where we're at this point. We're not enhancing OLADB either. So if we were going to invest more in native, we would do ODBC. In fact, we had that exact conversation just a couple of weeks ago. But at this point, we're going to focus in managed. And that's why I was kind of focusing on the events and so forth.
What's the big difference between the new version and the memory usage? Version memory?
In good or bad? It sounds like there was a comment there of experience that.
In the previous version, there were some issues related to virtual memory. If you still have Bluetooth stacks and everything on the devices, Windows Mobile devices, you had some memory problems.
With corruption?
No, with regards that you are lacking memory. Because if you run Compact Framework and SQL 3.1 and using all the reader stacks on the devices and scanners and stuff like that.
So.
Have a look at the contact log. There's just been 2 posts recently made.
Okay.
On what is the cost of all these can't load SQL blah 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 DLL on a device.
Oh yeah, Lakshmi posted that. Yeah.
Have a look at that blog entry because that's really the answer to that question.
Yeah, Lakshmi did a whole post on how to load DLLs in the right order, so they got.
Out of memory, it's something called DLL squeeze, which is specific to Windows. Yeah. But that is explained on the SQL content blog how you can work around that.
Okay, but so
So it's really a problem of Windows as a whole. We just get caught up in that. So we do better. We have not forgotten our roots, is probably the way to say it. Even though we're running on desktop, we've got a lot of guys that are very passionate around devices, and we're not going to screw that up. We actually do some different optimizations on desktop and device. So originally, we were really slow on desktop in comparison. We were slower than Jet. And that's, what was the value we did? We were doing, it was on writes. Because on devices, there's so little disk space that we didn't, every time we had to do a write and the file was full, we would just bump it up just a little bit, right? On desktop, on device, I mean, how fast can you scan something? But on desktop, people were running code going, just jamming stuff in. So every time we had to allocate more disk space. So on desktop, we actually take larger chunks to increase the file format. And on device, we don't do that. So we actually, not fork, we just kind of if-def the code there. So that's my general comment, just to assure you. Now, I don't know, well, actually, I remember posted a blog specifically on the DLL load. I know we fixed a lot of bugs in 3.5. There was some database corruption scenarios, and because of the shared memory thing, the device was crashing, 2 apps were crashing. So other than that, I can't comment any specific, other than I know we've done a lot of work that it was all specific to devices. We've been doing a lot of fit and finish there. In Windows Mobile 7, we've actually combined EDB and SQL CE, and because that Windows is a lot more focused on these things as well. So I think our quality is going to continue to go up quite a bit. Yeah. Oh, it's our only sample right now. So if you go to C program files, Microsoft SQL Server Compact samples, that's where our sample database is. 3.1, it was in the SDK. In 3.5, it's all the same place. Yeah. We've been trying to get around to another sample database. We just haven't had the time. So, yeah, it certainly could use some newer pictures. See that? All right, cool. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.